All right, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I know a few more folks might be coming in and out. We just hit the 100 mark of participants. So thank you everybody for joining us this morning. This is the Palouse Pesticide Education event. My name is Ryan Boylan. I'm the Research and Monitoring Coordinator here at the Palouse Conservation District. And we're really excited that you could all join us and for some of the presentations that we have from Washington State Department of Ag today. Before we begin, I just have a few logistical things. Due to bandwidth restrictions and for the remainder of the presentation, I'd like to ask everyone to keep themselves muted and turn your video off. And if you're not super familiar, these controls can be found at the bottom left-hand corner of your screen. There's a little microphone and video button that you can click on and off. If anybody has any questions during the presentation, you're welcome to drop those in the chat box. And that is a little word bubble that can be found at the very bottom of your screen in that black bar. It's kind of your control bar. We'll be moderating the chat box as we go throughout the day, and we'll answer questions at the end of each presentation. So feel free to throw things in the chat whenever you have a question. And then at the end of the presentation, if you want to actually ask a question in person, you can just unmute yourself and do that. And then I also just want to make note that this presentation is being recorded and will be available on Palouse Conservation District's website after the event. For those of you that are not familiar with who we are, we're the Palouse Conservation District. We were started as the first conservation district in Washington in 1940. Palouse CD is one of 4 conservation districts in Whitman County, and you can see our boundaries outlined there in green on your screen. And our mission is to foster voluntary conservation of natural resources by providing the tools, education, technical expertise, and financial assistance to support our local community. Conservation districts are a locally driven conservation delivery system that identifies problems and develops voluntary solutions. We are a government entity, but we're primarily funded by grants and are able to provide technical and financial resources to landowners interested in addressing natural resource concerns on their property. An examples of this include establishing riparian buffers or converting to direct seed technologies. And actually, just a little plug, currently Palouse CD does have cost share funding available for growers who are interested in trying direct seeding. To be eligible for this program, you have to farm within Whitman County. You can't already own a no-till drill, and you have to be willing to commit to 1 pass seeding for 3 years. The funds are essentially intended to offset the cost of drill rental or custom seeding, and the deadline to apply for this is March 19th, 2021. If you want more information, or if you're interested, please reach out to Tammy Stubbs. She's one of our natural resource coordinators here at the district, and her contact info can be found on the Contact Us page on our website. We're also accepting applications for our commodity buffer program. This is a first come, first serve program until all the funding is used. And more information about the commodity buffer program will be coming out in our newsletter in the next couple of weeks. You can also feel free to reach out to Anthony Hatcher. He's another one of our conservation coordinators of the district. And then finally, our programs and services are all guided by a 5-member volunteer board of supervisors. And it's all supported with staff of 21 folks, and that includes AmeriCorps members. And before we jump into the presentations, I just have a few more things. I just want to thank all of the supporters for this event. Green Cover Seed has actually donated a $125 gift certificate that we'll be raffling off at the end. And to be eligible for this, you just have to stick with us throughout the presentations until the end. So we'll be doing this right around 9 o'clock. I also want to thank Washington State Department of Ag, or WSDA. They're going to be doing the lion's share presenting today. And then all of this work has been funded through financial support or assistance agreement that we received from the US EPA. Okay, last thing, then we'll jump into the presentations. So over the course of the morning, I'm going to be putting up polling questions during the presentations. For those of you that are attending this meeting and registered to receive pesticide credits, please make sure that you respond to the polling questions. Since we can't do this event in person and we don't know if you're actually with us, we just want to check in to make sure that you're still engaged and that you just don't have the video on and the sound off. So I'm just gonna put one of the polling questions up now. For all the polling questions, there's no real right or wrong answer. We just want to make sure that folks are still with us. And I'll leave it up for a minute or two. And then if anybody does have any problems answering the poll, please just put something in the chat box, and Jody Prout, who's helping me moderate, and I will address those. All right, so here goes. If folks are just joining us, we're just asking everybody to fill out the poll that should be up on your screen at the moment. I'll leave it up for maybe another 30 seconds. All right. I can share these results with you. Everybody should be able to see what folks responded. We were just wondering if folks are interested in receiving pesticide credit and the category that best describes you. Great, so it seemed like that worked. Again, if you have any questions, throw them in the chat, and Jody is gonna help us moderate that. Okay. So be prepared for more polls throughout the day. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to our first presenter. Bradley, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen and then you can start sharing yours. And I'd like to introduce Bradley Farrar. While he gets his screen sharing set up, I'll just give him a quick intro here. Bradley is the Education and Technical Assistance Unit Supervisor in the WSDA's Pesticide Management Division. He supervises the Worker Protection Standard Train the Trainer program and 2 air blast sprayer calibration training programs. Additionally, he serves as WSDA's alternative representative to the Washington Tree Fruit Research Commission. He's worked at the Idaho State Department of Agriculture as a pesticide investigator and in the forest industry in China and Finland, where he focused on mechanized harvesting, supply chain management, and forestry safety. Sounds like a pretty cool job. Bradley will spend the next several minutes talking to us about pesticide resources and programs for landowners. And with that, I'll turn it over to Bradley.
All right, sorry. I clicked share screen and of course everything, all my controls got changed up, so should be getting back in here now. So it's great to be with you all this morning. Wonderful way to start the day with a coffee and a Zoom meeting. I'm pleased to see that there are so many people with with pesticide applicator licenses joining us today. And I'd just like to thank Ryan and the Palouse Conservation District for hosting this today, and like to thank all of you for joining us. So I'm going to very briefly cover a couple of the programs that WSDA offers through our Technical Services and Education program. So a few of the different trainings or core parts of our program are listed here. We focus entirely on pesticides, and mostly on training pesticide handlers and people that are going to be training pesticide handlers. And we also offer a few technical assistance programs. And so WSDA began its Technical Services and Education program in 1998. After some field research revealed that both agricultural employers and employees lacked awareness of how to properly use personal protective equipment and the label requirements on pesticides. So in the beginning, we focused on providing Spanish language pre-licensed classes and pesticide handler training in Central Washington. And that still continues to be the core, or those still continue to be courses that we offer, but this program has changed significantly in the last 10 years due to increased demand for pesticide safety education. And nowadays we're providing a lot more workshops, and we've also created some new pesticide educational programs. And I'll briefly explain introduce you to a few of those if you're not familiar with them. So one of our main programs that we have is our Worker Protection Standard program for training pesticide handlers. The purpose of this program is basically just to train people how to use pesticides effectively and legally and responsibly, especially, keenly in agricultural areas. It's a day-long workshop that's offered in English and Spanish. We are doing, due to COVID, we're doing virtual ones mostly this year. We still are doing some in-person events with social distancing for those that don't have the technological capabilities to join virtual trainings. And this training goes well above and beyond EPA's Worker Protection Standard training requirements. And as is required by the EPA, our curriculum is approved by them. We also offer a WPS Train the Trainer course. And this course is designed to help people take training to their farm. It allows people such as supervisors, managers, growers, to provide WPS training for their workers and their pesticide handlers there on their agricultural establishment. It's a 2-day-long course. We go deep into detail about the requirements of the Worker Protection Standard, and we also talk a little bit about some of the training methodologies and how to provide training to adults, and especially to some adults who may not have had the opportunity to attend formal education, beyond primary school. So this course is also EPA approved. There are 9 pesticide recertification credits offered through this course. And we also offer a 5-hour refresher course for people that have attended the WPS Train the Trainer course previously, to kind of help them resharpen their training skills, and to cover any of the changes that have occurred to WPS or other pesticide related rules within the last couple of years. And we love our trainings. We love the in-person trainings. We're hoping to get back to them soon. We also do virtual, and we love that. But we try to always have a great learning environment, and everything is interactive. We want everyone to be actively engaged in the trainings that we provide. We also offer a Spanish language private applicator pre-license class for individuals that are hoping to obtain their pesticide license. We've seen a huge demand for this lately, especially with the new regulations related to paraquat, in which now a lot more people need to be licensed due to those new label restrictions. These classes are offered virtually or in person. We love the virtual now because we're able to reach more people throughout the state. You know, we don't get to make it over to Whitman County as often as we do. So through virtual classes, we're able to reach a few more people, and we really enjoy that. And we love every interaction that we have with everyone throughout the state. This class, the topics are taken directly from WSU's Private Applicator Study Manual, and then the Private Applicator Pesticide Licensing Exam is offered at the end of the course. And just for those people, we always get the question, well, why don't you offer it in English? We don't offer it in English because WSU already offers pre-licensed classes in English. We just offer it in Spanish. So there are options for people either through WSDA or through WSU to attend a pre-licensed class. And finally, we have a couple of other programs that are focused mainly on air blast sprayers. Air blast sprayers, just due to their nature, are more prone to drift than other pesticide applications. So we have a few trainings, a few different courses that we have to help people try to learn how to more effectively use their air blast sprayers, how to calibrate and optimize their sprayers in order to have increased coverage and to ultimately reduce pesticide drift. We offer an on-farm air blast sprayer calibration technical assistance. This takes place on the farm using the farm's own air blast sprayers, and it's real hands-on. We limit it to about 5 individuals from the farm. I would just go through all of the steps to calibrate and configure your sprayer, and we also talk about other issues that can affect your sprays with air blast sprayers. We offer this in English and or Spanish. It's a free technical assistance, and we offer 4 pesticide recertification credits for those individuals that attend this or that invite us to their farm. And we really like it. We love being able to go on site to the farm and really see the challenges that individuals face. Then we also offer a day-long air blast sprayer calibration and configuration best management practices workshop, offered in English and or Spanish. And we go more in depth in our training than with our on-farm technical assistance visits. We do a combination of classroom and in orchard or in the field training. And we typically offer these in the springtime. And as you can see, this was taken pre-COVID. We get everyone together. We do a lot of hands-on activities, and we just go over every aspect of air blast sprayer calibration and how to improve pesticide applications out in the field. And of course, we also offer we offer quite a few other services. After me, Joe Hoffman's going to go into detail about our our waste pesticide disposal program. We also love to present at recertification events. So if you ever have a need for that, please contact us. And as always, if you have any questions related to the worker protection standard or pesticide use in general, please contact us. We're here to assist you. And again, it's great being here with all of you this morning. And now I'll turn the time back to Ryan.
Yeah, thanks so much, Bradley, for that overview. If you don't mind stopping your share, great. And then Joe, if you want to start your screen share. And while Joe's starting his screen share, I just want to say thanks for those of you who were patient. We reached the capacity on the meeting. we had to change a setting to let more folks in. So hopefully everybody that signed up is now able to get into the meeting. So while Joe's getting his screen to come up, I'll just give him a quick intro here. Joe Hoffman is the WSDA Waste Pesticide Program Coordinator. He was raised on a farm near Kettle Falls, about 30 miles from the Canadian border, north of Spokane, Washington, and obtained his Bachelor of Science in Agriculture from Washington State University in 1984. He started working for WSDA in 1985 as a pesticide investigator based at the Yakima field office. He has been involved with the WSDA pesticide disposal program since 1988, which was its inception, and has been the program's coordinator since 1991. Joe is a founding member of the Pesticide Stewardship Alliance and is dedicated to promoting product stewardship and helping people solve their pesticide disposal issues. And Joe will be talking to us today about pesticide stewardship and proper unused pesticide disposal. And it looks like our timing was perfect. So with that, I'll turn it over to Joe. And again, if anyone has any questions during Joe's presentation or any questions about what Bradley said, please feel free to put it in the chat box and we'll get those questions answered at the end.
So good morning, everyone. And Ryan, is my volume good?
Yep, sounds great.
Okay, well, let's get going. I am Joe Hoffman with the Washington State Department of Agriculture, and I coordinate the waste pesticide program. And this morning we're going to talk about pesticide stewardship, pesticide disposal, and some on container recycling. So let's get going. So the program was started to deal with obsolete pesticide disposal, originally for things like DDT, Aldrin, Endrin, basically a lot of the older pesticides. So we do offer a free pesticide identification disposal program. Its goals are to reduce the amount of unusable pesticides in storage, providing education and assistance, and also just a reminder that on-farm burning or burial of pesticide containers has been prohibited for over 40 years in Washington State. So why the program was needed is back in the 80s, a lot of changes were happening with EPA. A lot of pesticides were getting canceled for no longer have a use, and materials were accumulating across the nation. This is a photo here from back in the 80s, and just showed this is a shed where materials were accumulating. The one thing you'll notice is the lack of plastic poly jugs. And over on the right, there is a plastic. The 5-gallon containers came out first, but at this time, most of the 1 gallons and so on were still in metal. And so anyway, a problem developed that needed dealt with. And a lot of older abandoned chemicals also were in sheds. So why the need for the disposal program continues is there are still people with bins, either from places they've purchased or old materials that they've accumulated that are sitting in bins ready to go. Or somebody has bought a facility and has, this was the garage door when they opened it. On the right, you can see some pesticide boxes, a few on the left, and mixed in just a mess of materials in this shed here. And this example of materials that people had pulled out when we came to get them packed up. So an example of older materials they were no longer able to use. So what is a waste pesticide? It's basically a pesticide that can't be used due that was canceled, suspended, may have deteriorated, the label may have deteriorated, may be a container where the ingredients are not identifiable, or it may be something not in an original container. And this may have been done by a previous employee or previous owner of the land. In many cases, when there's been a property transfer or it's changed hands, even within the family down the line, somebody may have known what they had put in a container, but they didn't write on it. And so the current person has no idea what they're dealing with. But the bottom line, a waste pesticide to an individual is any pesticide that they no longer want to use. So examples of canceled product on the left here, DDT. Last legal use was December 31st, 1972. So we're almost on 50 years from when DDT was canceled. But then on the right, here's a 5-gallon container, perfect, of 2,4-D. But this was a person who no longer wanted to use it. And they were in an area in Northeast Washington in timber, and people had pretty well gone out of using that material at that time. And so they couldn't find anybody, if you can believe it, that wanted to use it. So we did dispose of it. Materials that aren't in original containers. On the left there, person made their own label up for the DDT. They had kids on the property and they wanted to make sure that they didn't get into it. Or on the right, the 2,4,5-T, just a little bit left in a jug in a storage shed that had a lot of material to dispose. Also unlabeled containers at the top left, we have a tote. The person bought the property and had no idea what's in it. Their labeling has been removed. So this one on the top of the container should be able to say it says WSGA sample number. And so what we did was pulled a sample out of the tote and took that to our lab for chemical analysis because these larger containers, that would be a 330-gallon container. The contractor needs to know what they're dealing with before they can take it off the property. And on the right there, labels deteriorating. This photo was from Eastern Washington, but this would be a very good example of over on the coast and the area where cranberries are grown a couple miles from the beach, where paper bags just do not make it after a long time. That they deteriorate and need to be dealt with. And also the containers just aging in bins. So when we get out on sites, you never know what you're going to find. So this was a place that the person used their coffee cans through the years to put just about everything in. So you never knew when you opened the top of a can, is it going to have nuts and bolts or something else in it? Or in this case, we opened it, there's a bag in there, and it turns out that it was parathion. And so this was a material last legally used in the mid-90s. And this was a place where the grower, I believe they said he worked there till he was 93 before he had to move off the farm. And so he had a lifetime of cans with little bits of things in them. So you never know when you walk into a shed what you might find. So the pesticide waste stream, the typical things we deal with, the unusable products or unwanted products, and those are things that people don't have a lot of control over. In many cases, it got canceled or something happened, it got exceptionally cold and froze, and the product just can't be mixed up without clogging spray nozzles or screens, things of that sort. But then the other areas that people sometimes want to get rid of material is from excess tank mixes, spill residues, unrinsed containers, wash water, and rinse aids. These other 5 are things that people do have control over, and we'll discuss some of that here in a couple minutes. So one of the keys is to keep your storage shed through proper stewardship to only have pesticides that you're being stored for use. as opposed to it turning into a hazardous waste storage area, which that's not something a person wants. So for a storage area, the key is just to keep materials separate and locked away from other materials. So for example, this one has a fence around it, but not required. But open containers that are sitting out on the table there, they should either be behind a locked fence to keep people who aren't the applicators out, or should be inside of a locked building. Should have a sign on it. Back in the day when people had highly toxic, a lot of danger poison pesticides, which is greatly reduced from the old days. At that time, a specific placard was required on the storage area, but the main thing is to have some type of signage on the pesticide storage in case there is some type of an incident or a fire. If the local fire department comes, you really don't want to attack a pesticide fire with water if possible. It's usually best, if the fire is already fully engulfed, is to let it burn out. And so there isn't a bunch of contaminated water then generated on site. And the lock on the shed, of course, one is for keeping people who aren't your applicator away from the materials, whether that be grandkids or grandpa, or a neighbor or whatever. And of course, with the price of chemicals, it also keeps the honest people out of the shed. There are times when people told us, well, we had stuff in there, and somebody came and relieved us of everything at 4 o'clock in the morning. So just a good idea for a lock on the storage sheds. So waste minimization, basically buying only what is needed, storing it properly, checking the inventory, and just like a grocery store, rotating the stock, use the older material first. And that should keep a person from getting too many materials that are getting too old and have precipitated out in their jugs. Planning, that is a key in whatever you do for a pesticide application, is mixing the amount needed. Plan ahead so that when you're done, you shouldn't have a lot of tank mix left. Using care while mixing and loading, do that on a mixed load site, or at least something as simple as throwing a tarp under the area where you're mixing loading out in the field, just a simple tarp or something in case an accident happens, that you're able to contain the material and be able to reuse it as opposed to it becoming a waste. And a key for rinsing containers is to try to do it at the time of mixing. And so the rinsate is in the spray tank. So a good calibration of the equipment should mean that there's no leftover mix when a person has left the application site. Also for equipment that is going to be used for multiple different types of pesticides. One is to use it to sequence applications, to do all of a certain material first, and then next, if possible, and then there's less rinsing of the equipment that's needed to be done. Of course, rinsing and washing the equipment on the field application site. This is what EPA suggests, is especially for the outside of the equipment, if there is a water source, is to try to do that out in the field. And so a lot of folks have, whether they be a small Gator type of tractor or a small tractor with a 50 to 100 gallon water tank that is out in the application site, to where they can wash down the equipment before it goes back to storage. Again, I mentioned mixed load pads at a permanent site, and if possible, the rinse water that may not have been able to be used in this application, it can be used in a future application. The key, though, is marking it so you know what you have, or what the next person that deals with it, they know what they're dealing with. And one way to do that is simply putting a copy of your pesticide application record and just attaching it to the outside of the drum or wherever you put the material. And then not only do you know what you have, but you know what was mixed with it, how old it is, and it's simple. Since you already made the pesticide application record, the material that comes out gets attached. Very clear if someone goes to use it in the future, what they're dealing with. So storing pesticides separately, that is a key of keeping them out of the, like that garage or the shop or whatever, is to have a separate room for pesticides. You do not want a floor drain in the storage shed, I'm sorry. You don't want a floor drain in the storage shed. Keeping the product off the floor. Cheap pallets are very handy for that. If materials need to go on, whether it be concrete or gravel, sacks, large containers, anything like that, it creates an airspace under the container. Keeping the liquids stored under or beside the dries. We've definitely disposed of plenty of material through the years where in the winter a container cracked and broke, and then when it thawed, it leaked down onto everything below it, and that needed to be disposed of. Cleaning spills as they're discovered, and storing the protective equipment in a different room, especially like a respirator cartridge. Those work 24 hours a day, absorbing whatever in the area they're in. So if they can be kept out of the storage room, they have a longer life. So storing pesticides separately, this is an example from a farm. This is a very nice storage area. You can see the dries are separated from the liquids, or the liquids are below the dries. And some people categorize them into types. It's however a person does it, but just keeping them up off the floor and organized, and then a person knows what they've got too. Of course, this is larger. This is more of a warehouse style, but as you notice, everything's on pallets here. And the key on the pallets is no matter where we are in the state, we're a cold weather state for the winter. And so moisture, even through concrete, unless it's nicely painted, moisture can come up through the floor and into the bottom of sacks and things of that sort. So like say the pallets breaks that from happening. Here is a storage area that had a drain in it. The thing, if you have this in your storage room, you want to get rid of this drain, either to move the storage or to put a berm around where something can't go in here, or the final solution is to remove the drain grate and fill the drain with concrete so nothing else goes down in there. And then cleaning spills as they're discovered. The 3 C's of control the spill, contain the spill, and then clean up the spill. So when they're small, they're much easier to deal with, and it isn't a task that's left for Saturday when you have time. So as we mentioned, keeping the storage area locked and access only to the people on your property that should be doing the mixing or application. This is a great time of year to do a base inventory to know what's in the shed. And then that can be updated with purchases and use. And then after the spring applications, to update that record for people that are doing Global Gap. That is a requirement that they have a current use record. So inspecting that storage during the winter, dealing with leaky or poor containers, segregate usable and unwanted materials away, and then group them however you prefer, whether it be by types of insecticides or class or so on. And also is to give away or dispose of all non-current pesticides, something that you're no longer using and somebody else may still be able to use before it has to be disposed. For storage facilities, basically if you're looking to build one, your local fire department and building department are the people to contact. And for people that are in urban areas, it's also for them to talk with your neighbors. You don't want to find out after you've built a facility and then you put the pesticide storage area placard on the building, that the neighbor is now quite upset because that's 5 feet from their property line. Of course, that's only an urban and suburban area issue, so that does not affect most farms. So just assessing the operation, good stewardship eliminates waste. So what to do with these unwanted pesticides? Since we mentioned that burial and toss in the garbage are old methods, you can participate in our disposal program, can visit our website and submit an inventory, or call or email us to request assistance if you have drums of unknowns, or have bought a place that has a lot of poor condition containers and you need a hand. We try to schedule collection events based upon customer demand around the state. This is an example of our, this was updated. So on the right where it says 2020 waste calendar, there's now the 2021. We are doing direct pickups rather than collection events right now due to COVID restrictions around the state. This is an example of an inventory form a person would fill out. Front page is basic information, and on the right, whether you need assistance, and also if a person wants clear overpacked bags sent to them ahead to hold containers that might be in poor condition that are deteriorating. And then this is an example of an inventory. And the very last item, unknown. If a person has an unknown, that's what you just simply write down. Don't know the product, don't know the ingredients. If it is something that's in larger than a 5-gallon container, we're going to need to determine what it is before we can accept it for disposal. So in that case, we may need to come out and get a sample or try to identify it ahead of time. For the smaller containers, 5 gallons or less than that, we through what's called hazard categorization, we can determine enough about the product so it gets packed with like materials for disposal. So the anchor of the program, the key is the Department of Agriculture is the hazardous waste generator. There is no charge to customers and the paperwork's relatively simple. So Department of Agriculture is the only name that goes on the hazardous waste manifest or any permanent records. Customers' records, disposal inventories, those are all discarded once we're done with the disposal. So this 1 bag of DDT here is likely the oldest bag of DDT that we've collected. This was post World War II, but before USDA started registering pesticides in the early 50s. So this also doesn't even have a California spray code on it. It does say code 72 at the top left, but you know, the labeling and whatever, that all changed in a couple of years. Some older materials like this calcium arsenate, you notice the front of the label on the left has a poison with skull and crossbones on it, but on the right, here let's look at the PPE being used. And you know, today that would be a joke, but this was a label made in the 30s and there were lots of those. And so for a label, it has a poison on the front, and this is showing how to apply the material on the back. These older labels are long gone, but some of them in today's date are quite comical. So here on the left is a container, Quaker Oats, we all grew up with. The fiber Quaker Oats container, except this one had DDT. They wrote Vapotone on the top, and when we looked at it, this was about half full of DDT. On the right here, Hill bourbon bottle that had Kelthane in it. And one of my favorites was the Jim Beam Parathion. At least they wrote the rate down here. It was 2 tablespoons to 3 gallons of liquid. And I think Parathion was written on there twice. So drums, we try to overpack them since the materials we're getting are already old and there's a lot of miles to dispose facilities. Most all drums get overpacked into larger drums or containers. So as of the start of this month, we've had nearly 500 collection events around the state of Washington, and little over 3.6 million pounds collected, but the interesting is the average of 415 pounds of pesticide per customer. So everyone that uses the program is in the same boat. They have materials to get rid of. There are some people that just, you know, have a bag to get rid of. There's other folks that have a truckload of materials to get rid of. So I'm going to cruise through these next few slides here pretty quick. So for this last fall, we did direct pickup since with COVID restrictions, we couldn't hold collection events. So this, we did direct pickup and collected a smaller amount of material, but we did deal with 64 customers last fall. And then this, yeah, and that's the numbers there. So we were in Spokane, did down Pullman area, Yakima, Prosser, and then one small project up in Salton. And I'm just going to cruise through those. So this is at a typical collection event. Since there's a wide array of materials coming in and in various condition, and this is a photo here from the Yakima area at a collection project where there's lots of old tree fruit insecticides coming in. The people are in PPE with Cernex boot covers, and then we use these powered air purifying respirators. So there is a motor, it's filtering air and pushing it to the face piece, and we don't fog up. People can work for several hours in this without fogging up, where me and a regular full face respirator that doesn't have air powered, about 5 minutes, I'm sweating enough in there to where it's hard to see out of the respirator anymore. But these powered ones took care of that. So vehicles get unloaded. This person on the left, you see their shoulder not in gear. They're calling out codes, and the people unloading are writing these numbers on the containers, and it just makes it go much easier through the process. As I mentioned, material can come in truckload quantities. And this is just unloading materials, whether it be from bins or backs of trucks. The liquids go in these poly drums. And this is an example of at the end of the collection day at Yakima, where the boxes are solid pesticides have been packed into those cubic meter boxes, and then the liquids have gone into all of these other types of drums. This was at a project at Othello, and so these drums were pre-packed out on farms ahead of time. And we did nearly 36,000 pounds in that one day. This was fall of 2019. That's the largest amount that we've collected in one day and packaged in one day. We did have a larger event, but it took several days to pack. This was all packed up in one day. And sometimes we have much smaller collection events. This is over at Centralia, a gorgeous day. And instead of a large building, we had smaller loads coming through. And that, compared to the Yakima, this is what came out of that collection. So just one box and half a dozen drums or so. Down the Tri-Cities, there's always lots of pesticides to get rid of. So a few folks, Manuel Ornelas, he is our Eastern Washington field lead, and he comes out of the Mattawa and Yakima areas. Matt Densley is the Western Washington field lead, and he is out of the Olympia area. And then I'm the guy with the orange vest on, looking at a container label that we needed a little more information off before the people could code it and dispose of. And we do use some state parks. We borrow all the areas that we do our disposal in. And so this was a setup there at Daroga State Park. Nice fall day, but as you can see, the people handling the products are wearing gear. So we've had to change operations due to COVID-19. So we had to postpone the last spring's collection events and delayed the ones in the fall and the summer. And so basically we're now limited to when gatherings are allowed for 50 or more for what's the term? not required or whatever gatherings, but basically we're not there yet. And so what we're doing instead of collection events is we're doing direct customer site pickups or meetings with a few customers in the local area and gather their materials up. Pre-collection on-site technical assistance is still available for those who need help, have drums with unknown chemicals, or have more than 10 containers with unknown chemicals. Announcements were sent last summer to all licensees that had email on their pesticide license, and asking folks to send in inventories. And so we are working off of those inventories now. We did some in the fall, and here we're getting ready to do more. Our work right now in the fall and spring is largely based upon where those inventories were received from.
Joe, just want to let you know you have about 10 minutes left.
Okay, thank you very much. So this spring here, we did last week start doing site pickups, and we will be doing direct pickups as our plan through the spring, and then summertime we will see how the COVID restrictions are for what we do in the fall. And so to restore collection events, we need them in a phase 3 or 4 counties. We need to be able to buy PPE, need to be able to travel relatively safe, have restaurants open, since the people working at the collection sites come from all over. Our contractors, folks will come out of 4 different locations, and then department staff come from a bunch of different locations, and of course customers from different locations. So before we start having groups together, we need to ensure that it can be done safely. So our spring pickup locations, we've started with the central Puget Sound and going out to the coast next week. Then in late March, we'll switch up into the Okanagan, Chelan area, then move back to North Puget Sound. And then in May, we'll be out in the Columbia Basin. And then finishing our spring, if we still have some financial resources left, down in the Columbia Gorge in Southwest Washington. For late summer, we're looking at the Palouse region. So that's part of this project that is going to be discussed as soon as the next speaker comes on. So what we'll be doing is, if people have an interest for disposal, is to contact us as long as we can get those inventories in by early August. So that gives people plenty of time to go through their sheds now. But to get inventories into us, then we will either schedule a direct pickup, or possibly by that time we may be able to restart collection events. But again, we are looking at the Palouse area. And in the chat, since with harvest and then replanting, if a person could just send in a chat message of what time of September would be best for the collection work. Would it be near the end of the month, near the start of the month? We just need to get that one done by the time September closes, in that September is the end of a federal fiscal year, and we are using some federal money for that collection event. We'll also be going down to the Blue Mountains region, and then finishing out back up north in Northeast Washington, Spokane, and then down in the Tri-Cities. So to participate in an event, as I mentioned, try to submit a disposal inventory form at least 1 month before pickup or collection. So like I say, now through the first part of August for out in the Palouse area. And just some examples of places where we've gone and removed and packed them up. Old storage sheds that looked like this. Then the materials were either put into bags where they transported them in, or put into, here's a load out in the Moses Lake area, and that got put into these drums in their storage shed, and they brought those into the collection event. Right now, we would be doing direct pickup of those. Just more examples of field work of materials being prepared for disposal. We had a bin of leaky material here, and got that all cleaned up and into these drums ready for disposal. And here's an example of a hazardous waste sticker that goes onto the drums. As you will note on there, if it's readable, generator's name, WSDA, says Puyallup. There are no customer names or anything else on there. So if there was an issue with the containers once they've been collected and shipped, a truck accident or a cleanup or something that needs to happen down the road, the Department of Agriculture is where the buck would stop. Loaded and placarded truck, ready to go. People ask, where does this go? So most of it is goes through hazardous waste incineration. And this is a new facility down in El Dorado, Arkansas. And since we're tight on time, I'm not going to go into all the specifics here, but just will show you the materials first started at a rotary kiln, but then the rest of the operation here is the collection and whatever of any mists or particles or whatever that were broken apart in the kiln. And at the very end, this is an operational plant. Unless it is a foggy or day with a lot of moisture in the air, you don't see anything coming out of the stack. By the time it gets to the end, in this case, for 1 million pounds in, they're allowed to lose 1/10 of a pound of material. So this is a very high-tech process that the pesticides are destroyed in. So quickly on empty containers, this was before there was a container recycling program, and this was set up in Grant County. So this was the site where people brought materials, and you notice it wasn't just empty containers. There were containers of pesticides, but like the old days of the uncontrolled dumps, people would occasionally come in and set them on fire. So this was the old days before there was a container recycling program, and a lot of landfills still don't want the old containers. So container rinsing, as we mentioned, the key is try to do it during the mixing operation, and to get the rinsate put into the spray tank, and that eliminates hazardous waste. Here is a pressure spray nozzle. So it's a good process, but can I back up there? Poor technique. The spray nozzle should go through the side of the container. It does a better job of rinsing the container than putting it through the bottom. And this is a couple of spray nozzles. They screw onto a standard hose. And then the containers go through, this is the chemical company, Agriplast, processing these. And they end up in little chips such as this. And these right now are used for specific purposes. Most of them are made into drain tile, either for field drains or around buildings to drain around the foundation. They have been made into docks and piers, pallets, and posts, but with the current plastic market the way it is, the drain tile is pretty much what most of it's being used for. And just one note on IBCs. Here on the left is one new good just from the factory that's perfectly shippable. But these on the right, when they're dirty on the outside of the container, they're not allowed on the road for transport to a disposal facility. So those are a problem. Basically, we need to remove the contents out of them because none of those on the right are shippable. And so contacts for our program, we do have a toll-free number of 877-301-4555. And then when you get there, you can press 5 and it will send you to voicemail. And please leave a message, especially during these COVID days. We will get back with you. But many times there is no one sitting at the location where the phone number is coming in. But I do get a text message that a number came in and we will get back to you. The other way is emailing us at wastepesticide@agr.wa.gov. And then under a separate program, the container recycling is separate from the pesticide disposal. That is run privately through the National Agricultural Chemical Recycling Corporation, and their local contractor is Agriplast Incorporated. And the key there is to take their phone number down, 390-2381. They are based in Oregon, but they do have recycling set up out of Eltopia. They're just north of Pasco, and they work around the state. But you need to get on their list. And so it's just giving them a phone call so they know you have containers, and they can either route you to, let's say, a McGregor or a Wilbur Ellis or someone that's that has a lot of containers that they're going to do a collection at. Or if you have a lot them yourself, they may come directly by your farm. So anyway, since we're about out of time here, maybe rather than taking questions and answers right after my presentation, we might get into the next one. And I will be sticking around. So at the end of the next presentation, I can answer your questions there. Thank you very much. Okay. Okay, Brian.
Thanks so much, Joe. That was great. We
Sorry,
did have
I rushed through. I have a lot of material there. So
yeah.
A tight time this morning. So thank you very much, folks.
It's good. We're trying to jam a lot in. I did have one question, but yeah, maybe we'll just save that to the end. And I just want to throw up another quick poll question. If everybody could answer the poll. And the question is, what was in the Quaker Oats container? And just so you know, there's no right or wrong answers. You can just fill out the poll just so that we know that folks are still on the line. I'll leave it up for another 30 seconds. All right. It looks like 90% of the folks have filled out the poll. I'm just going to close it now, and I'll show you all the results. Pretty much everybody got it right. There's no, like I said, there's no right or wrong answer, but it was DDT or Vapotone. All right, so thanks again, Joe. You have a wealth of knowledge and seems like tons of experience. We were gonna maybe take a short break, give everybody a bathroom break, and come back in a couple of minutes. We'll probably start again at 8:10. So yeah, if you wanna grab another cup of coffee, use the bathroom, and then Abby Nicholson and Margaret Drennan will start their presentation in another 5 minutes. And Abby, if you don't mind, Joe, if you don't mind stopping your share, and then Abby, you can start your share, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure thing. Abby here. Let me get that.
Perfect. All right, we'll see everybody back in a couple minutes here. All right. Hopefully everybody got a chance to get up and stretch a little bit. I know Zoom fatigue is a real thing. So hopefully that helped a little bit. But I'm really excited about the next presentation. I'd like to introduce Abby Nicholson and Margaret Drennan. They're both going to be presenting. And I'll just give Abby and Margaret a quick intro here. So Abby is an environmental specialist for WSDA's Natural Resource Assessment Section, or NRAS, and primarily works in the Surface Water Monitoring Program. Abby has been working for NRAS since 2014 after completing her Bachelor of Science in Environmental Science to pursue her career in environmental toxicology and risk assessment. Prior to her start at NRAS, Abby worked for Skagit County Natural Resources as a water quality technician, where she sampled streams for fecal coliform and helped with the implementation of streamside restoration projects. Abby's favorite topic is fate, transport, and toxicological effects of pesticide mixtures on humans and the environment. And then Margaret Drennan is a natural resource scientist with NRAS and has worked on a wide range of projects, including best management practice effectiveness, nitrogen availability in agricultural regions, food safety implications of dairy manure compost used in red raspberries, and developing a pilot pesticide stewardship partnership project. Margaret has worked at WSDA in several project positions between 2011 and 2014 before joining permanently in 2014. Margaret has a Master of Science in Environmental Engineering, and after finishing her degree, spent several years working as a freelance technical writer. She initially joined NRAS to help with writing projects from grant proposals to reports. And I can attest to Margaret's writing ability. She's the one that got the grant that's supporting today's event, so that's great. And Margaret also enjoys a variety of projects NRAS works on and allows her to develop new skills and learn about new topics in agriculture and environmental science. And with that, I'll turn it over to Abby and Margaret, and they'll be talking to us about pesticides and water quality in Washington State and the Palouse River watershed.
Thanks, Ryan. I really like how you say NRAS. Makes it a little bit more snazzy. So like you said, my name's Abigail Nicholson, and I do self-title myself as a data wrangler. And this is a lot of what I'll be talking to you about today, but also really larger portion of that, what I'm going to be talking to you about today is kind of the risk assessment things, because it is very early and numbers don't always stick. And I've done several presentations now, and quick short story is that several years ago, I was doing a presentation on the Pullman campus or nearby. And I was doing this presentation and I was newer in my job, and somebody in the middle of my presentation said, why does this matter to us? You know, I'm way out there in Eastern Washington, but I was talking about really Central Washington data results. And so I've been really engaged in creating these presentations so that you do walk away from these presentations really knowing how it affects you, even if some of our monitoring results are not right in your area. And because of my bandwidth issues, I am going to turn off my video for now while I'm talking, but I will be here talking to you. You just won't be able to see me anymore. And let me start my timer. I do have to say, you know, I've done these presentations in front of many people, and I can't see any of your faces right now. But I can assure you the anxiety is still there talking, you know, doing these public presentations. But like I said, my enthusiasm and my engagement to make these things interesting is certainly there, and it's just been increasing every year. So I got my timer started. This is my title slide. So in today's talk, these are the talking points and the main topics that we'll be talking about. I'm going to start a little bit with a who and why NRAS exists, and then what we do. And then I'm going to go, the large majority of this presentation is going to be more about this pesticide risk assessment and really how it affects anybody on this call as a producer. And then at the very end, that's when I'm going to pass it over to Margaret, where she's going to talk about our future plans. All right, so we are, NRAS stands for the Natural Resources Assessment Section, and we're within WSDA, and we're basically a research group. And the key point I want to get across here is that we're non-regulatory. There is a component of WSDA, the Pesticide Compliance Division, that is regulatory, and they are enforcement. This part of a WSDA is not enforcement, so I want to make that very, very clear. So we have 11 full-time staff in Olympia and Yakima. I am out of the Yakima office. So again, like I said, I do the data wrangling, and then I also go out and do the monitoring. And then I do things like this to spread the word. And so we do a lot more than just water quality monitoring. There's a big push for soil health, and so we have some staff working on that. We also have a big mapping program where we are mapping agricultural land use across around the state, and that gets refreshed every couple years. And then we also have a pesticide usage component, and then also we're involved in pesticides in groundwater, and then also some water availability issues and what comes along with that when drought happens. All right, so why does NRAS exist? So many years ago, before my time, before I started with the department in 2014, there's a lot of concern over salmon. And then there was also a lot of concern over the overlap with salmon and agricultural land use. So my first map here with the grayed out areas, that represents the habitat that is important for salmon. And then going on to the next slide, I have superimposed our agricultural land use map. And so the colors, the pink colors represents that overlap between that important salmon habitat and those agricultural land use areas. So again, it was in the early 2000s when this program started. And a big push was because the concern over salmon being harmed by pesticides. So NRS was created to answer that question. Is it really happening? And if it is, where? And one of the major goals of this program is to keep those tools, those pesticides that you guys use, available. We don't want to see them go away, especially if they're a useful tool for you. And with that, we also want to try to keep those ecosystems healthy. And I know that it can be conflict at some time, but I can assure you, and my promise to everybody is that if I did not feel that was true, I would walk away from this job. So I do feel very passionately about that, that we are doing both of those things. All right, so in short, we are monitoring for these streams, or in these streams weekly. It's just a snapshot, really. This is myself, this picture in Marion Drain, just south of Yakima, and we're sampling weekly through the typical pesticide usage season. So that's typically March through September. And we have 175 different analytes, and that list changes from year to year depending on any that are dropped, any that are not used or not registered, and also the new ones that come out onto the market. So, and with all those results, we're assessing each detection, and I'm going to get into more of that here shortly. One other thing I want to make very clear, and this kind of goes back towards the fact that we are this part of WSDA is non-regulatory, is that every time we have a sampling location within a watershed, we are typically, we almost always sampling at the very bottom of the watershed or near the bottom of that watershed. And that is by design. We are not trying to target anybody. We're trying to get a broad understanding of what is going on in that watershed as a whole. And this example here, what I'm showing on the map, this is Burnt Bridge Creek in Vancouver, Washington. And to that point, I also want to make it clear that we're not just targeting agricultural areas, because we know that there is a lot of pesticide use also in these urban areas, and we see it quite frequently. So we do have several urban area sampling sites, because we need to know if there's any harm coming from those urban use pesticides, things that you can pick up without a pesticide license that you can find at your local Home Depot or Lowe's. So in general, our goals for this program, especially with the surface water monitoring component, is to have sites that are representative of Washington's very diverse agriculture across the state. So we're really working towards this true statewide program so we can get a really good sense of what is happening out there. And we're doing this through collaboration with regional experts and producers as of most recently. And Margaret's going to talk a little bit more about this pesticide stewardship partnership concept later in the presentation. Really, we're really trying to get a very broad perspective of what is happening out in the state. So to show that, I have this map here, which is from 2003. This is from the first year of monitoring that we have. And you can see we have 2 sites, one on the west side, which is urban, and then we had several in the lower Yakima Valley, and that is where we started. And with the goal of reaching into a more statewide representative program and results, we have expanded. This is our map for our sites in 2021. As you can see, we have 3 sites in the Palouse watershed furthest to the east, and this is the furthest east that we've been able to go. And we've really appreciated being able to collaborate with the Palouse Conservation District because we're really at our end for our Yakima, Yakima staff included, to be able to drive and get these samples collected in a reasonable amount of time. So we are able to move further east now and capture that. So very quickly, this is my agenda from earlier in my presentation. You see we've moved past these first 4 points already. So the majority of the rest of the presentation is going to be about this pesticide risk assessments and also the importance of water quality monitoring data for those risk assessments and how in effect more data is helping you. So to begin, here's my little flow chart of what we'll be talking about in this section of the presentation. And at first, on the far left-hand corner is Registrant. These are the companies that are producing the active ingredients and producing these products. They have to go through a federal product registration process. And then during this presentation, we're going to take a little sidestep, and I'm going to talk about Risk Assessment 101 in a very basic level, so that when we get into talking more about the human and ecological risk assessments that apply to pesticides, you guys will have a better understanding. And then at the very last, it goes through state product registration, and then that's when the product is available to you guys as producers. And so to be clear, it is EPA's job to get these products through these processes, and is the registrant's job to produce some of the data that is needed for these processes, in addition to other researchers. So as I mentioned, we're going to start here at the top left and then work our way down to the bottom right. So to begin, when a product is being registered, it needs to go through this through efficacy studies, and this is a very broad overview. There's much more detail to this initial process. But it's basically answering what active ingredient works and at what rates and on which crops and on what pests. And so you get that information, the registrants get that information together and submit that to EPA. Okay, now we're going to take a sidestep and kind of do this. What is risk? All right, so risk is a combination of the exposure and also the toxicity. So exposure is always talking about how much, how long, how short of time anything is exposed to anything that could potentially be toxic. And then the toxicity is really how potent it is, how poisonous it is. Does it take a little bit or does it take a lot to have an effect on any organism, including humans? So to illustrate this, I have my little bubbles here. This is the risk assessment equation. It's always exposure plus toxicity is how we get our risk. And this is an example of some toxicity, some exposure, and we're getting some risk because of that. And then we can move to my next example here. This is where we have a very short exposure or a very weak exposure, say low concentration or something like that, but the compound is very potent. So we have a large toxicity bubble, I have a very small exposure bubble, and we're getting effectively the same amount of risk. And one example I like to use is warfarin. My husband's family, unfortunately, has problems with blood clotting. And if you or your family has problems with blood clotting, you'll know that warfarin and some of the related compounds are used to treat those problems. And with warfarin, it is my understanding that yes, you can take one pill and it does great. And you take 2 pills, you're really, really running a high risk because that compound is just so potent. And it is also a registered pesticide as a rodenticide because it works just as well on us as it does on rats and mice. So here's my next example of the flip side. This is when we have a very large exposure, but a smaller toxicity. And we're getting to just about the same amount of risk. And my example here is that water can be toxic. If you have enough water in you, your muscles quit working, including the muscles for your heart. So it can kill you. It's a death by dilution of your, I can't think of the words, ions and things in your bloodstream that allow your muscles not to work. So if you drink enough water, it will be toxic, even though we think of it as very benign and something that's really actually healthy for us. In toxicology, we talk about it's the dose that makes the poison. So that would be an example of a high exposure, but relatively low toxicity, and we're still getting risk. There's risk with everything. All right, so the next point I want to get across, that risk is quantifiable. There's always numbers behind it. In this example, you take your rate of application, your pounds per acre, and the concentration at which will cause an effect on your pest, and you're getting a such and such % chance of population decline or a pest death or organism death, and anything you can think of. But the point I want to get across here is that it's always a calculation. It's always a number. What is not a number is how we decide, how we look at that risk. It's how much risk is okay involves our emotions and our values. And so you insert our emotions or values into what is a very mathematical, straightforward equation, and you get your perceived risk. So we can inflate or deflate what we think is risky, safe or not safe, based on our emotions and our values. And then, of course, there's those decision makers that are out there that are also using their emotions and values to define how much risk is acceptable. And we see this all the time, everywhere. Examples. So again, it's this example of there's risk calculations, and then there is decision makers deciding how much risk is okay. A common example of this is like car insurance. They're going to look up and plug your information into an algorithm into your computer and pop out, do we want to insure this person or not? But behind that question, there's always a number. And lots of numbers put into these algorithms. One could be like the number of tickets you have. If you have 5 tickets in your lifetime, well, that might be too much. And then they might say, nope, we don't want to insure you. That's too risky. So somewhere in those insurance companies, there is a decision maker that decides how many tickets is okay and how many tickets is not okay. In the same context, lots has changed over the last year. And when I was giving this presentation initially last year, I didn't have this material, but now I do. And it's very convenient for me because it's really a in-your-face example of how risk is assessed and how risk is perceived and how those decision makers have used those risk calculations. And the best example, most prominent example I can think of is this COVID-19 pandemic. And there's a 6-foot rule. Somebody decided that 6 foot was going to be good enough. There is a calculation behind that. And I don't even know what it is, but somebody decided that, yep, 6 foot is going to be okay. And I'm sure there are some calculations that are behind that. And they had to decide, a life and death situation here. How many people are we willing to risk by implying the 6 foot rule? And it doesn't mean that, or somebody had to decide, and somebody decided that 5 feet, that's too risky. We don't want people standing 5 feet apart. or 7 feet. Oh yeah, that's fine. That'll be fine. They found this spot in the middle, and it all has to do with those risk calculations. But again, it was the decision on how much risk they wanted to allow that made that decision. So in conclusion here, kind of my risk assessment 101 conclusion. NRAS, myself, and my colleagues, we are the risk assessors. We're the ones doing the calculations. We're doing the math. It is the decision makers and people appointed and elected officials who are doing the how much risk is acceptable. And that's where we're getting our benchmarks from, how we're comparing our results. So that's Department of Ecology, that's EPA, that's Fish and Wildlife, that's National Marine Fisheries. And to a certain extent, they are also risk assessors, but they are the ones putting out the criteria, the rules. And that's the rule. They're saying we don't want to allow any more risk than this. They are setting the benchmarks. So again, NRAS, myself, we're doing the calculations. We are the risk assessors in this situation. And this is my reminder to myself, if you guys are watching this presentation, that to keep track and look for these bubbles that I've been using in this presentation, or the purple bubble is for exposure, and the green bubble is for toxicity, because you will see those again. So moving on here, I'm going into the middle of this diagram where we're talking about the pesticide risk assessments. I just got done talking about risk assessments in general and how it all affects us. And now we're into pesticide risk assessments. And I'm going to start with the ecological. This is the risk of pesticides on the environment around us and how it affects it. And that's all like Ryan was alluding to. I'm really interested in this whole fate and transport. And that is, in other words, it's answering how much gets where and when. It's tracking the point of release to the point of contact. And there are many, many different pathways that anything that we release out into the environment can take. And it can be a big mystery sometimes. How did this get there? You know, sometimes we find pesticides on the tops of mountains. It's like, how did it manage to fly through the air and get there and never degrade? But it happens. And so in this context, I have this a diagram here, and you'll be seeing this several more times, but this is kind of the potential, very broad pathways that things can take to move around in the environment. And this applies to pesticides and also everything else. So within this diagram here, the multiple pathways, things can degrade. Things can degrade by microbes, by sunlight, by heat. These compounds can degrade into something less toxic. On occasion, they can degrade into something more toxic. It doesn't happen as often, but it can happen. Also, characteristics of the pesticide are taken into account. So their solubility in water really depends on how fast and how far they'll move if they get into the water systems. And every active ingredient of the 175 we're looking at, and all the degradants, they all act a little bit differently. They're all unique in how they move around in the environment. So now back to that risk bubble, I'm talking about the toxicity side here. So that was the exposure side, the fate and transport. Now we're talking the toxicity, and this is all about laboratory benchtop studies, where they're finding out how much will affect what organisms and will it kill them? Will it just impair them? Will this reduce their population level? And it's all using laboratory animals and plants. It's just basically answering the question of how poisonous is it to non-pests in the context of federal pesticide risk assessment. They're looking at what could it do to anything else out in the environment. So EPA is charged with making this decision. Is it too risky or is it not? For the entire United States. So they have to take this exposure and this toxicity, and they have to make a decision. Is it going to be okay or is it not going to be okay? So they have to take into account everything across and everywhere where this potential pesticide could be used. So that's every application, every field, every type of crop on the label, every stream, all weather conditions. And I put an asterisk there because we know how hard it is to predict the weather as is, right? So try to predict the weather 10 or 15 years out when you're trying to register a pesticide that will be registered for 10 or 15 years. It gets very difficult, very fast, and we truly cannot measure it all. If we could, it wouldn't be more of an assessment, it would just be a calculation. But we can't measure everything logistically, and financially, that's impossible. So because we can't measure everything, we use computers. We use these computers to model all those fate and transport characteristics and model a lot of the toxicology characteristics of each of these chemicals. And I say we, I mean really EPA is doing this through the registration process. So all it is it's a bunch of math. So going through back to my diagram here with off-target movement, is there is a mathematical model for each of these off-target movement pathways. And there's a lot of calculation that gets done. So for each of these example pathways, there's also scenarios. So this, one scenario in one region is not going to be the same as the next because, maybe the weather's different, it's hotter or it's drier. So they have to think of all these scenarios of all the different types of streams, all the different types of landscapes, what kind of crops are nearby, what season is it. So they come up with all these possibilities of what could happen through the year. And then they group them together because there are so many scenarios, it's really infinite. And so to make this calculation feasible, they have to combine some of these scenarios together. So example would be like, there'd be Eastern Washington wheat example, but then there'd be a Montana wheat example for pesticide X that's trying to get registered. So because we have to combine all those together, they have to make a ton of assumptions about what the characteristics are of each one of these scenarios. And this is really where it starts getting into how it affects you and how it affects the label. So if that's been a lot for you, tune in right now. There's lots of input parameters that they put into these complicated computer models. And they have to assume because there are just so many different scenarios. So some of the assumptions that are made, like there are 12 different categories of agricultural land use. We know that there are more than 12 different categories of land use in Washington state, without a doubt. They also assume that there's a consistent stream volume, like an irrigation ditch. We know that streams are different from top to bottom of the watershed. Also, they assume that there's a maximum application rate. This is them going for, well, we want to know what the worst case scenario is. So they're assuming that maximum label application rate is being used whenever the product can be used. And we know through our pesticide usage program that sometimes that is not the case. And so it's not, and I'm not trying to harp on EPA, they have to do this because they have to make this decision. And this is the best science that they have available at the moment to do that. So these assumptions are necessary, don't get me wrong. But you might ask, well, why do they have to assume so conservatively? Well, it's because they're really trying hard to avoid being underprotective. They really don't want to be wrong. And they really don't want to be wrong if they say it's actually less risky than it actually is. So again, they're avoiding being underprotective. Because if they are and somebody catches wind of it, usually there's lots of lawsuits, and there still are lawsuits that have been going on since I started in this program. So it can be a really a big time suck for them if it doesn't work out. So again, they're avoiding being underprotective, and that's why the assumptions are necessary. And the other point I want to make on this slide is that this is where NRAS comes in. We are monitoring in streams to find out what is the actual risk, not based on computer models. We are out there measuring instead of trying to predict. We are measuring what is in the water. This gets us a really good indication about what the risk actually is. We can do some of those calculations without doing as much guessing or as much assumptions that have to go through with those models. So these are basically, there are assumptions with the exposure side of that equation. There are also assumptions on the toxicity side. We are not, NRAS, we're not doing any of the measuring here on this side of the equation, but I can say that there are assumptions made, and basically there's standard test species used. So even though they're trying to predict what effect these compounds have on all the other organisms out in the environment, they use standard test species because they cannot feasibly measure these compounds against all these other different species. So for example, trout is used for every freshwater fish that you could, anywhere in the United States, just about, that is the standard test species. So we know that there are assumptions made on that side of the equation as well, out of necessity. So quickly, I'm going into the human side. A lot of the same concepts apply here, and that there's lots of equations to assess what your exposure as an applicator or as a consumer would be to these compounds that are being registered. And again, there's infinite number of exposure scenarios, so some assumptions can be are used. But again, they're going through the same process of what's the exposure, and then also what's the toxicity. And if for humans, the toxicity comes down to what are the lab rat studies. Back in the day, I know we used to use, there's some examples of where prisoners were asked if they voluntarily, hey, do you want to drink this? And we're gonna see what it does to you. That is gone. We don't do that anymore in the United States, but there are lots of animal studies. There's cancer and non-cancer types of studies. Okay, so this is, again, getting to the meat of where this affects you. These risk assessments, there's two big ones, the ecological and human health. The numbers that are calculated, and after somebody says, okay, well, this much risk is okay, what do we have to do to the exposure to make sure our risk is not above X amount? And this is where those label restrictions come in. This is all about reducing that exposure either to humans or to the ecosystems where these potentially will move off target. And so that can be represented as application frequencies. Again, that's the time of exposure that that it could be occurring. Buffers, if needed be, or application rates can be raised or lowered as long as they maintain their efficacy. And also application weather. Again, you don't want it to move off target. If it doesn't move off target, you're not getting the exposure to the organisms outside of the cropping area. And for human health, we talk about reducing our exposure through gloves and respirators, eye protection, and everything like that. On the toxicity side, I do want to make the point that sometimes those values will change, but not very frequently. That really only changes if new science comes out. So if there's new research comes out, it does happen, but not very often. So the point I want to make here is that we had this complicated, what you now know is pretty complicated risk calculation, and it's the decision makers, again, the EPAs, the ecologies, and things that have to assess the benefit and cost against the risk, and it's the decision makers who are doing that. So for example, it's like the risk of a crop destroying pest, or the benefit of that crop to human nutrition and health. Those things come into play when you're talking about how much risk is okay. This is after that risk calculation. So in conclusion, here's the end of the the federal pesticide risk assessment. This risk is quantifiable. That is a calculation. Say that enough. It is the decision makers who decide how much risk is okay. And we are all now very acutely aware of a good example of that. Is the decision makers who are implying how much risk is okay for us as a society. And these risk calculations are all done with these computer models, and they're pretty complicated, even though we know that there are some shortcomings. And EPA does their best to predict the risk, and they are aware that the models aren't perfect, and they really avoid being underprotective. And this is where NRAS water quality data helps it improves the knowledge of the actual risk out there. We are out there measuring, not predicting with computers what the concentrations are out there in the water. This is where that comes into play. And then of course, all the label restrictions are where you see an impact of these risk assessments. So briefly, after the pesticide is registered or approved, it goes to the states, the state level to get the state level registration. And then after that, the product is available. So in the states, WSDA, who does the state product registration. All right. So now I'm done with the majority of my talk. I'm going now into the results for the year 2020. We had one site in the Palouse, Dry Creek, this last year. And again, this was part of our goal of trying to get some statewide results. So we moved and contracted with the Palouse Conservation District for them to collect the samples for us. And we paid for them. The sampling occurred in March. And then we got put on hold until June. And then we got started back up in June and went every week until mid-October. So there was a total of 17 site visits, 17 samples collected at Dry Creek this last year. And we looked for 175 different analytes. So some of those are current use pesticides, things that are used or currently used according to WSDA registered. We also look for legacy pesticides, and that's mainly DDT. And then we're also looking for the degradation products of some of those current use and also the legacy pesticides. And then we've also tacked on some nutrients and sediments because that can give us an indication of where some of these, what the off-target movement pathways are for some of these compounds. I know I need to speed up a little bit here. And so my last point I want to make here is DDT. Yes, people still ask, well, why would you sample for that? It's been gone for a long time. It's like, yes, it has been gone for a long time or not registered for a long time. We still see it quite frequently. And this comes down to those fate and transport characteristics where it just doesn't go away. And it's still very potent. A lot of people, you know, I've heard people say, oh, it works great. And I say, yep, it's still working great. It's working great wherever it's at. And it's because it's very resistant to breaking down as opposed to glyphosate or something really breaks down quite easily. And it also binds to that sediment. So Ryan talked earlier about, you know, so the conservation practices that they have cost sharing for, and some of that, you know, no-till or anything that reduces erosion is also going to help with some of those DDT off-target movement. All right, it was made clear to me that it is really good to talk about what we find, but also what we don't find, because I'm all about giving credit where credit is due. So I'm really trying hard. You know, I'm the data wrangler. I always look for, oh, what did we find? But it is also really important for me to talk about what we did not find, because that can be equally important, especially when it comes to those registration processes. So in 2020 on Dry Creek, we detected 43 different pesticides, and we did not detect 127 of those. Now, our analyte list is meant for all of our sites, and so it's quite possible that most of those that we did not detect aren't even used in the watershed, but it's also possible that we're not detecting those because the off-target movement has successfully been mitigated. So we want to make that clear that that is a possibility. Generally, we're finding mostly herbicides. That green part of my chart there is herbicides, so 67%. And we had a total of 322 detections, which is about moderate. You know, it's not a tiny bit, but it's not a lot compared to our other sites around the state. It is typical that we see mostly herbicides at our other sites as well. So that is not a surprise because herbicides are so very water soluble. That is their main transport pathway is through the water. And we're measuring the water, so that makes sense. That is what we're finding most of the time. So not all of those 322 detections are harmful. So like I said before, we're comparing these results to these benchmarks. And if you remember back to those bubbles, sometimes you can have low toxicity, or sometimes you can have a high toxicity. And this is an example of that. Glyphosate, we detected very frequently, both this last year at Dry Creek and also around the state in 2019. But compared to the benchmark, we're not even close. It is 0.12% of that EPA benchmark. So we're not getting very close at all to that benchmark. So we find it frequently, but we're not seeing it as an issue for aquatic life at all. On the other hand, imidacloprid, has one of those really big toxicity bubbles. So it really doesn't take much to cause an impact. And that was found a couple times at Dry Creek in very low concentrations. And that ends up being well over that benchmark. And so that is something that we are bringing to the table. And this is why we're talking to people. This is what we're finding and what can we do about it. So yeah, it was at 125% of that EPA's benchmark at a very, very small concentration. So, as I pointed out, these very small concentrations of pesticides can be harmful to aquatic life, and usually those are the insecticides. So out of the total 322, 11 of those detections had concentrations near or above those benchmarks, and that is how we kind of decide which ones to focus on these talks. Like I said, we found lots of things, but we're not concerned about those because the concentrations were so low. But what I will talk about is the ones that are, yeah, we should at least talk about those and see what we can do. So I said 11 of those. Most of those 11 that we found that were near those benchmarks were imidacloprid, dimethoate, and Lineron. So I pulled off some example labels off the internet. So there are many more products that have these active ingredients in them, and this is just a few, but I wanted to show you those just in case any of those were familiar to you, so that you can now understand these active ingredients I'm talking about and what you might be using. And one other point I want to make clear is that all the detections are off-target movement, even though we're pretty sure that they're not causing any sort of harm. They are all off-target movement, and you guys all paid for those. So keep that in mind. It's all you paid for that. You paid for that chemical to do its job, and now it's doing its job somewhere else. So keep that in mind. As soon as it leaves, that's your money literally going down the drain that we're seeing. So I understand some of these might not be very expensive, but I know from experience, I have a grandfather who was in the dairy industry, and they were penny pinchers. And my poor dad, living on a dairy, still didn't get to have real ice cream. His mom would go buy ice milk, which I don't even really know. But he now has a problem with eating ice cream these days because it was, they were such penny pinchers, and they had to be because farming's tough. And he had to eat ice milk. So reach into your inner penny pincher, and when you're seeing these results, just keep in mind that these are your dollars I'm seeing that are unfortunately being washed away. So with that, just do what you can to limit your off-target movement. We talked about some of the trainings that are available to everybody, and keep up to date with what you can do to limit that off-target movement, and it will be good for everybody. With that, Ryan, do you want to do the polling question now? I thought this would be a good opportunity. And then after this polling question, Margaret is going to take over the presentation. And
that's perfect, Abby. Thanks.
Yeah.
I'm going to launch the poll now. So just again, I know I've said this a couple times, there's no right or wrong answer. Just fill out the poll for us, and here it goes. So Abby, while the poll is running, can I ask one of the questions that was put in the chat?
Sure thing. Go for it.
This is from Carol Black, and she said, micrograms per liter, is that parts per million or parts per billion?
Parts per billion.
Okay.
So those are very small concentrations, small concentrations. But remember, those small concentrations can still have an effect. I should really calculate what the parts per billion dosage is for warfarin or something for blood clotting, and maybe it'll put it into perspective for some people. But it seems like a small number, but it's effective.
Looks like Jeff put that answer in the chat, so thanks, Jeff. And then I just had a quick question. What is the EPA benchmark for glyphosate?
Ooh, it's somewhere in the thousands of micrograms or parts per billion. I don't have it off the top of my head. I'm sorry.
No, that's okay.
Yeah, I want to say it's like 2,000, 2,500 or something like that. And we found it at, was it 2.55?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That can be found online. EPA
Yeah.
post their benchmarks.
So that's great. Okay, there's still a few polling results coming in. I'll leave it up for another, let's say 30 seconds.
Okay.
All right, the numbers aren't moving anymore, so I'm going to shut the poll down. And I'll share the results with everyone. And again, the majority said it binds the sediment and still can enter streams through erosion, which is one of the mechanisms that Abby talked about. So that's great. Thanks everybody for answering that. And then did Margaret want to start now?
Yep. So I'm at the very end of the presentation here. So I'm gonna pass it over to Margaret. I'm gonna put myself on mute, and Margaret has a few slides here.
I do, yeah. Abby's going to keep running the slides, but I'm going to be talking. So I don't know, maybe I should just keep my video off.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Won't confuse anything. All right. So hi, good morning. Thanks for sticking with us all the way through to the end. I'm Margaret Drennan with the Washington State Department of Agriculture Natural Resources Assessment Section, and I'm based in our Olympia office. So I wanted to talk first a little bit about the assistance agreement that Ryan mentioned and Abby has mentioned, which is the Columbia River Basin Restoration Funding Assistance Program. Columbia River salmon and steelhead runs were once the largest in the world, with as many as 16 million fish returning annually to spawn. In addition to ecological concerns about the salmon runs and other ecological effects, this grant program also focuses on risks to human health. Many of the compounds that they're focusing on can bioaccumulate, meaning the salmon accumulate them in their body, and then anything that eats the salmon will accumulate it in their body, and then anything that eats that. And so you get increasing concentrations as you go up the food chain, and they can pose a risk to human health as well. The EPA has been working on this program for quite a while. In 2005, they convened the Columbia River Toxics Reduction Working Group to begin this process. And in 2020, they awarded the first grants, giving $2 million to 14 projects in the Columbia River Basin. The goals of this grant program are to increase monitoring and access to data, reduce stormwater and agricultural runoff, promote citizen engagement and education, and also clean up contaminated sites. Do you want to go to the next slide, Abby? So how did we get involved in this, and what are we doing at WSDA? So Abby mentioned previously pesticide stewardship partnerships, and what does that really mean on the ground? Sort of how does this work? We've been working to grow our surface water monitoring program to truly cover the agricultural regions in Washington. And as Abby mentioned, we have 11 staff members in the Natural Resources Assessment Section. So obviously we can't monitor everywhere that we want to without local partners. We can write reports and we can write fact sheets, and that doesn't always get the information to everyone who needs it in the way that they need it. I don't know how many people have time to read one of our 200-page annual reports about pesticides detected in streams across the state of Washington. I edit those annual reports, so I know what reading them is like. So we're working on developing pesticide stewardship partnerships with organizations like the Palouse Conservation District. We're following the model developed in Oregon. That has been really successful. And so that allows us to work with the people that engage with the agricultural community daily to help us identify the problems and also identify the solutions. The outcome of that is that people like me and Abby get to keep spending all of our time thinking about pesticides and keeping track of those 175 analytes. And the Palouse Conservation District gets more information about what's going on in their streams that they can then share with their community, and everybody wins, in my opinion. And we can go on to talk about our plans for 2021. So we're going to continue monitoring at Dry Creek. Abby showed you some of the results from last year in Dry Creek. Ryan and his team will be there collecting water samples for pesticide analysis for a second year. We're also, with the funding from this EPA grant, we are adding 2 additional sites, Kamiak Creek and Thorn Creek. It's going to be the first year of monitoring at those sites. The Conservation District will be collecting samples at all 3 of these sites every other week from March through October. Hopefully, we will be able to have a normal monitoring season without taking a 3-month break in the middle and continue our regular schedule. Those samples are going to go to the Manchester Environmental Lab in Port Orchard, Washington. to be tested for 175 pesticides and pesticide-related chemicals. We're also going to be exploring pesticide analysis in sediment to see if we can get a better picture of what's happening with those pesticides that are less water soluble and have a tendency to stick with the soil and sediment and can't be found as readily in the water column. And that's all I have. Thanks very much for your time. And we're here to answer any questions that you have or discussion.
Great. Thank you both, Margaret and Abby. I was thinking it would have been great if I had a sound effect that was like a round of applause, but I didn't get on that this morning. So if anybody did have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We're just about out of time, but I bet you Joe, Bradley, Margaret, and Abby would stay on 5 or 10 minutes after if anybody has any additional questions or wants to talk in any more detail about their presentations. Abby, if you don't mind stopping your share, I just have 2 more slides I need to run through really quickly. Great, thank you. Okay, so as I mentioned in the beginning, for those of you that stuck with us through the end, we were gonna give a raffle off a $125 gift certificate to Green Cover Seed, and our winner today is Drew English. So congrats on that, Drew. We'll be getting in touch with you after this meeting about receiving the gift certificate. And then just one final thing. I just want to thank everybody for taking the 2 hours this morning to sit with us. I definitely learned a lot, and I hope everyone else did as well. After this talk, you'll be receiving a survey via email. It'd be great if you could take the time to fill that out. It just helps us make these events better in the future. And then it's a good time for anyone that's attending to provide us with future topics that you'd like us to cover. And then finally, just a quick note on the pesticide credits. For those of you that did register for pesticide credits, after this meeting, I'll compile a list of people that had their registered pesticide applicator license numbers from the registration form. And we'll also look at responses from the polls. It should take about 3 weeks to a month for that to show up in your license credit report. And if you have any questions on that, you can feel free to reach out to me. My email is there at the bottom. My office phone number is there also. It'll show up as a course number, and the course number for this course was 2021-149. With that, everyone is free to leave. I did have one question for you though, Joe, when you were speaking. And the question was, is there a statewide estimate of the amount of waste pesticides in a dollar amount annually?
If there is, I have not seen that analysis. It's the first thing that we've learned from surveys is we can't even determine how much unusable or unwanted pesticide there is around the state. So, but as far as the amount, the one thing I can say is through all the years I've been doing this work is that most people are using good stewardship methods and trying to use the pesticide correctly and as little as possible. So no, unfortunately though, I can't answer that. And I think there were a couple of other chat questions there. Or if anyone has any right now, I can definitely answer that. Again, as far as the collections coming up in the Palouse region, is to contact the department if you're interested sometime before August, and then we will put together the scheduling. Sorry about that phone going off. I've got current projects going on the west side here. But anyway, if people send that in, then we can get back with you and make sure that you don't miss that collection coming this fall.
Yeah, that'd be great. There was another question in here. Someone asked where our Dry Creek monitoring site was. I put the answer in the chat, but it's north of Colfax on Manning Road by the grain elevator. Just for those that were interested and are still with us. Yeah, we can leave this open for another couple minutes. If any more questions come rolling in, let me know if I missed anything also. Otherwise,
I'll take up some dead air, Ryan, for a minute.
Yeah.
I just want to put it out there. I put in my little blurb on by my name there, but I am available for any sort of presentations. So like grower meetings or anything. If you have anybody else that you think would be interested in hearing a presentation like I gave, please do feel free to reach out and contact me, and I'd be love to do that.
Yeah, and thanks for presenting, Abby. That was really great.
Oh, I see one in the chat here. It was talking about DEET, which is the insect repellent, typically for mosquitoes and so on. That does not have any coordination with DDT. The letters may be close, but the DEET stood for diethyltoluene, and so it was repellent that is completely different. So I just saw that come up a few times there.
Okay.
Yeah, I can speak a little bit more to that. It is surprising that we do find it in the surface water, because it's not expected, because it's relatively used in small quantities. But it's just one of those things that's a little bit of a fate and transport mystery. You know, we assume it's coming from people. Maybe it's coming from wash water. Maybe it's coming from people playing in the creek upstream, or hunters or something like that. But it's definitely there, and it's surprising. And it's one of those things we see in such low concentrations. Again, we see it, but it's not approaching one of those benchmarks.
Maybe this is a silly question, but what is the chemical name, or like the active ingredient in DEET?
It's an acronym. It's whatever Joe just said. It's very long.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So OFF, I think, is the product name for one of those products that has DEET in it. You see the repellents that you see in the stores.
Yep.
Yeah, just for a general, diethyltoluene is a short name for the long chemical.
Okay.
Just like DDT was 3 letters, but it's a long name.
It looks like there's a couple more questions. One from Walter that says study of nitrates in groundwater. I'm assuming that's asking if there has been any studies. Were you going to chime in there, Margaret?
Yeah, I can maybe speak to that a little bit. So we at Washington State Department of Agriculture, we primarily have historically studied surface water. We have done a couple of small groundwater studies, and we're working to develop more groundwater capacity. And I can't actually answer many questions about it, but what I can do is put anyone who's interested in that information in touch with our staff member who's doing that work. So if you want to reach out to Ryan, or if Ryan wants to, you know, put Walter in contact with me, I can pass that question along to Jackie, and she can provide a lot more information about sort of where we're at and what we're doing and what we've learned so far.
Great. Thank you. Yeah, I'd be happy to put anyone in touch with Margaret, Joe, Bradley, or Abby. So feel free to reach out to me.
Okay, I do see another question here. It says, is there any place that recycles IBC chemical totes? Agriplast does not take them anymore. And that is a problem with the plastics market right now, in that they can't ship the plastics to China anymore. So there's a lot more plastic in the market than the manufacturers of products are wanting. And so I do not have an answer for that, other than if it was an IBC that held a pesticide, and there was an agreement with the distributor that it would remain sealed, would be to talk to the distributor about sending it back or taking it back at the time that you get more chemical. Right now, that's about it. The other is once they're clean and do not have any pesticide residue in them, they are considered regular trash. The market is going to change. We are in a down cycle right now, but we we are all looking for that to change in the future. But yeah, right now IBCs are very difficult to dispose of.
There's another question from Brian about credit sign up. So Brian, when you registered for the event, one of the questions was to enter in your license number. And if you did not do that during registration, you can either put it in the chat now, or you can get in touch with me using my email that's on the screen there, and let me know that you attended and send your license number to me.
Yep. And then the other aspect of that also, Brian, is you'll have need to have answered both of the polling questions that were asked during the presentations in order to receive those credits.
Right. Thanks for chiming in there, Bradley. I forgot about that.
Oh, and the last was looking at a couple of chat responses and responses to me. Looks like about mid-September then is where we'll try to schedule the pesticide collections for out in the Palouse. It's either that or going into later into October, and we do need to do this first round before the end of September. So we will shoot for mid-September for that, and we will get information out as we get closer.
Great, yeah, and I'm sure the district will help advertise that as well.
Thank you.
Yep. All right, well, we're about 10 minutes past and the participants keep dwindling down. So if there aren't any more questions, I just want to thank everyone again that's still on the line for attending, and thank you to all of our presenters, Joe, Bradley, Margaret, Abby, and Jody Prout, who's the research or education outreach coordinator here. She was instrumental in making this all happen. So thanks, Jody. All right. Well, with that, we'll see everybody next time.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thanks, Ryan. Thanks, Jody. Thanks, everyone.
Yes, thanks everyone for joining us.
Thank you very much, and let's all hope for a great crop year.
Yeah. All right. Bye, everyone.